People who see me sometimes just because of my appearance, they think that I would have a very strong accent. I remember once when I moved and I was being introduced at one of the churches. One of the ladies just came up to me. She said, "I am so glad you know how to speak English." I was wondering what she thought I was going to say. While I was in England, during my third year of college, it was a year of trying to make a decision as to where home really was. Is India my home, or should I come back to the United States? And I had no idea what God's plan for me was and how I would ever find somebody. I had no idea what to do with my life. I'm Pastor Leslie Louie, and I serve as the president of the Carolina Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. I grew up on the island of Sri Lanka. My mom and dad were actually missionary teachers, and my father was a pastor also. When they left Spicer Memorial College in India, they moved down to the island of Sri Lanka, which is kind of like a teardrop-shaped island right off the coast of India. I was born there. I was born in a little town called Kandy, and during my years when I was in the classroom and as a teacher and also as an educator, even as a principal, people sometimes just tease me saying I was just the Kandy man because I was born in the town of Kandy on the island of Sri Lanka. During my years there, my boyhood years, I grew up there till I was about 11 years old. When I was about 9 years old, I remember my dad meeting with all of our family. It was Christmas Day actually, and Dad told us, our family, that we'd been talking about moving to the United States of America. It was very interesting. Even though Dad was sharing with us his on that Christmas Day, that was back in 1961, and as he was sharing with us his desire to go to America, there was a sadness that was on the face of my mom and dad, and I couldn't really quite grasp what it was until he revealed to us, to my brother and my sister, he didn't have the money to bring all of us to America. He was going to go first, raise the money for our family to come there. And I thought, well, you know what? It's okay. Dad will go to America. Because everybody's rich in America, and so he'll earn money real quickly and we'll all be together. The days passed into weeks, and the weeks passed into months, months passed into years, and we didn't have any internet. We didn't have any of the technology that we have now, and so I never heard my dad's voice. I never saw my dad's face, but all I had was week after week his faithfulness in sending us those letters. Dad would send us different types of foods, and some things I liked, some things I didn't care for. I think the very first time I tasted Vegelinks, I thought that was the grossest food on the face of the earth. I thought, man alive, those poor Americans, we better send them some rice and curry. About seeing Dad after all those years, I was kind of wondering if Dad would even remember what I looked like. When I was 11 years old, I remember my mom walking into the house and saying, "We have our tickets. Dad has finally made all of the arrangements for us to come to America." And that was quite an exciting adventure to come there. And it had been over 2.5 years since I had seen my dad, and I was a little bit nervous about seeing Dad after all those years. I was grown a lot taller. I was quite apprehensive at that moment, but I was so excited. More than being excited about going to America, it was the moment of seeing Dad again. I remember that special moment when our plane landed in Washington, D.C. And I remember stepping out of that plane and looking out, and right above there were hundreds of people who were welcoming passengers who'd come from overseas home. And I remember my dad's hand waving high, and I just waved right back at Dad. And I realized in my heart there was a joy that Dad recognized who I was. Soon after I arrived in the United States, we arrived in Maryland, and my family settled there. I started school at Sligo Elementary School there, and I finished my elementary education and my secondary education there. I have to give a special word of credit to my 8th grade teacher, my very first teacher in the United States, who really believed that God had a special purpose and a plan for my life. Even though I didn't know what that plan was, he believed in me, and he always affirmed me. I finished my high school in Maryland, and then as I was finishing my high school, I was trying to figure out where I wanted to go to college. I thought, you know what, I've been in Maryland, I'd like to see other parts of the United States, and so I had applied to go to Union College in Lincoln, Nebraska. Was still planning on going to Union College. Dr. Ray Hefferlin, who talked to me and said, you know what, Union College is a long way from your home. Why don't you consider Southern Missionary College? And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and prayed about it, and I thought, well, you know, that is closer to home. And so I decided to go to Southern Missionary College. During my 3rd year of college, I took a year to go to Newbold College in England. And you know, Newbold, during that year while I was there, it was a year of trying to make a decision as to where home really was. Here I had been in the United States for a number of years. I was getting close to finishing college, and while I was in England at Newbold College, I was trying to make a decision. Where's home? Is India my home, or should I come back to the United States? And it was during a Thanksgiving when England wasn't celebrating Thanksgiving. It was Thanksgiving on the campus at Newbold, and all the American students were gathered together and they were celebrating Thanksgiving. I was actually sick in the dorm room and I was recovering from pneumonia. And all of a sudden, I just heard a knock on my door, and all the American students standing outside my door with a big tray of my Thanksgiving meal saying, Leslie, you're one of us, and we didn't want you to miss out on your Thanksgiving dinner. I always say it was the pumpkin pie that convinced me that America was my home. When I first was trying to figure out what to do when I was in college, I kept changing my majors all the time until I was called into the academic dean's office, and he said, Leslie, in college we don't change our major every month. And so he said, you really need to focus on one area. And I said, I have no idea what to do with my life. And he prayed with me. I didn't receive any kind of a quick revelation on that, but I remember a few days later, a gentleman walking down the hall. He looked very dignified, and he pointed at me and he said, your name is Leslie Louis. I said, how on earth did he know my name? And then I quickly figured out I'm the only Indian on the whole campus. And so he must have heard from somebody. And so he says, I want you to come and be my kitchen manager at Camp Galaqua. And I said, I don't know how to cook. And he says, you don't have to know how to cook. I'm not asking you to be the chef. I'm asking you to be the kitchen manager. I said, what does the kitchen manager do? You are the man that's in charge of the kitchen. When you leave that kitchen, I want everything to be in order. Well, I soon found out when I went to Camp Galaqua what the kitchen manager really did. And I said, where do I start? And they pointed me to a vat full of dirty pots and pans. And so I started off as the pot washer for the camp. And I scrubbed pots and pans for a whole summer, eventually became the camp counselor, eventually became the boys director there at the camp. And that led me into my desire to work with young people. I started my first job as a teacher in the Florida Conference, and then I worked in the Ohio Conference for 8 years. I came back to Carolina for 2 very brief years here in Charlotte, and was quickly called to the Kentucky-Tennessee Conference to be a principal of a very large school there in Nashville, Tennessee. And then in the year 2001, I transitioned to becoming the superintendent of education for the Gulf States Conference. In 2006, I was asked by the president of the conference to consider serving as the executive secretary, his executive secretary for the conference, and I served in that capacity for 6 years. December the 19th, 2011. I'll never forget that date, because that's the date as I was driving down to interview a pastor in Panama City, Florida, when I got a phone call that changed my life to where it is now. And he said, Leslie, this is Elder Jim Davidson. And I knew Elder Jim Davidson because he had been the president of the Carolina Conference. And I was wondering why he was calling me, because I knew that he was now at the Southern Union. And he called me and says, "You've just been elected president of the Carolina Conference." And I thought to myself, this man has the wrong number. And I told him that. I said, "I think you've got the wrong number." He says, "You are Leslie Louie, right?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "You've been elected president of the Carolina Conference." And I thought, how did this happen? Nobody even interviewed me. Nobody called me. Nobody asked me if I was even interested. And all of a sudden I'm elected to serve in this capacity. I wasn't sure because I thought I was planning on retiring. I was very happy where I was, and I had no ambition or intention of ever serving as the president of anything. I was just happy serving the Lord where I was. I asked for some time to pray about it. After praying about it for 2 days, my wife and I made the decision that we would submit to the Lord's leading in this matter. And if the Lord had led the committee to ask me to serve in this capacity, then I would go. We submitted to that invitation, and we've been here ever since. You know, I think we all have, we all try to figure out where God is leading in our lives. All of us, we look at different things and circumstances that take place in our lives that give us some sense of direction. And I look at those circumstances. Sometimes we look at them after the fact because we can't anticipate many of those things. I think the most important thing is constantly to remain open to the voice of the Holy Spirit speaking to your heart. And anytime, there's that wonderful passage in Jeremiah 29, verse 11, that says that God has a future for us. He has a future filled with hope for us. But if you look beyond that passage of Scripture, you will find me if you search for me with all of your heart. And I think that as we search for God with all of our hearts, God will guide and God will direct. And He'll use various means. He'll use people, He'll use circumstances, He'll use impressions of the heart, and He'll use various opportunities. Just as I one day longed to come to America, I think we're all longing for that day when we can go home to heaven. We don't know what heaven's going to be like. We just have heard little bits and pieces, like I had heard little bits and pieces about America. But nothing will be as perfect as that time that we are home in heaven. Because the most amazing thing to me was not just coming to America, but to finally see my dad again. The most amazing thing about going to heaven is not just the streets of gold and all the wonders that Jesus has planned for us. What will be the most wonderful thing of all is to see Jesus' face and realize He was the one that gave everything so we could be there.